My name's Linda Ozian. I'd like to welcome you to our first afternoon session with James Bland. James is a PhD candidate at the University of Oklahoma. His focus is on colonial Latin America and Native American history. He holds degrees from the University of Wyoming and George Mason University and has worked in museums and education. He currently serves as a collections manager and as a board member of the Jacobson House Native Art Center in Norman, Oklahoma. James.
You guys hear me okay? Is this okay? All right. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for finding this room. There may or may not have been treasure at the end of the rainbow, but I'm very excited to be here. About 15 hours ago, I put in my PhD submission, and so I think it's kind of nice that the very next thing to say thank you is to kind of come back to a history place and tell wonderful stories about people who are still doing wonderful work, like the artists who are featured in this presentation. But to get back to kind of the theme of the conference is place and context, and the way that I put context into both art and Oklahoma comes down to one word of context, and that is Borderlands. And more precisely, Borderlands, if you're going to define it, is a mixture. It's an in-between. It's a not quite one and not quite the other. And understandably, that's a very ambiguous idea. But in attempts to kind of make sense of that, Borderlands, both people and the things that are found in them, through that ambiguity, new ideas, new places, and new experiences, and fundamentally new art gets created. And Oklahoma is a perfect example of this. And the question I always ask people is whether or not Oklahoma is part of the South. And I've done this poll very many times, and the answer is always maybe. And if you think about it, there's a good reason for that. There's several regions within Oklahoma, from the Great Plains to Little Dixie, to the Ozarks, to the Great Plains. There's multiple historical industries that have given Oklahoma its historical character, whether that's ranching or farming or drilling or herding. And Oklahoma historically has been a borderlands, even during Indian territory, between the migratory horse nations like the Kiowa and the Comanche, and the agricultural nations like the Caddo and Wichita, and again, with the intervention of the Federals, when removal happened with the Southern tribes, Oklahoma became a borderlands again. And whether through people, economics, or something as simple as mutually intelligible languages and symbols, the influences of many people and many things and many art languages come together as part of a very, very broad borderland story, both in Oklahoma and then as part of the West as a whole. And this also extends to native art, and this is the context that I'd like to tell my story into, or rather the story of these artists, because the native art and native heritage is not static, and this is something that the keynote was all about, is that as much as there's a heritage, there's also changes in response to outside forces. And I think two examples here from modern art in the mid-century of the 20th century, really, really great examples. There's T.C. Cannon and Oscar Howe, both of whom were very much ambassadors of native art, but also very much contemporary artists in the mid-century. And that context, that borderlands between native art historically and contemporary art scenes is a big part of what I would proffer forward as a consideration of how ledger art and biker art mix. And the first part of that is the original story of ledger art precedes the 20th century, and that's where I suggest that the term plains pictorial art is very useful. Heather Autone and Joe Capturehorse kind of coined this term plains pictorial art, or the pictorial tradition within the Great Plains, and these very geometric, very fine detail work is a geometric language without the use of letters well before ledger art as we know it today, including decoration on otherwise very functional objects such as teepees, parfleche, boxes, leather containers, but also as a form of history in the form of winter counts, calendars, documents painted on bison robes or buffalo robes, effectively working as history books with the pictorial tradition of the Great Plains. And ledger art is probably very recognizable throughout the world just because of its success, but we're getting to that in a moment. The ledger art itself is a borderlands or a meeting between the pictorial tradition of the Great Plains and mediums and materials of the 19th century, whether it's paper, colored pencils, crayons, and these new tools allowed the pictorial traditions to amplify and to develop new styles and new details into their work that continue to become its own form of art. I think another stepping off point again where this becomes an Oklahoma unique story is the story of the Fort Marion captives who, after the Red River War in Oklahoma and Texas, a few dozen Kiowa and Comanche and Apache veterans are transported by the Federals to Fort Marion in Florida. And these artists, these veterans, become artists, again, in a new context as the painters, the drawers, the ledger artists, among many other things that they do, in the process of being at Fort Marion. Here you have one example of Howling Wolf. He was a Cheyenne member of the Fort Marion relocation chapter, and he's posing here in Fort Marion as part of his outreach, as part of his kind of engagement with the tourists. And again, I think you can. The Fort Marion, not only because it was a profitable source of income for the artists, but also because it was a new exposure to many different things, whether it was the steamboats, whether it was the new buildings. You can see that changing in the perspective and the angles that many of the Fort Marion ledger books show, again, for the first time on a national scale. And finally, I think just one very personal story is that of Saint making medicine, or more commonly known by his baptismal name, David Okerhader, who was a veteran of the Red River War, was relocated to Fort Marion, was a ledger artist, and then after his baptism into the Episcopalian Church, became a deacon and went back to Oklahoma to serve as a minister in his home region, and was later canonized as a saint in the Episcopalian Church in 1986. And you can see the geometric design of the stained glass, I think, is very evocative, almost, of the geometric style of pictorial art. That's actually in Syracuse, New York. Don't know how that got there, but it was a new development, I believe, when the church was being built. And this takes us to biker art itself, and this is the heart and soul of the talk I'd like to give to you. And I think this is an exceptional example of Borderlands, both in topic and in place, and even in consumers, because not only obviously is there a continuity but change between horse and rider and shopper, but there's also in the art market a very new brand of art for biker art, for Western art, and ledger art fits surprisingly well and welcomed into that circle. And the story of these artists that I'd like to bring forward to your attention today kind of shows that that excitement, that new style, that borderlands between ledger art, biker art, Great Plains, and mainstream art. And the first example I'd like to bring to you is that of Jim Yellowhawk. And Jim Yellowhawk, he's Cheyenne River Sioux and Onondaga, and he works not only as a ledger artist, but a digital artist, dancer, leather worker, and ledger drawer and painter. His Renaissance career seamlessly complements also his love of bikes. To quote him, probably maybe when I was 12 to 13 years old on Cheyenne River Reservation, my father bought me my first motorcycle, and it started from there. And that was my calling, just dirt bikes, but that was the initial thing. And that begins his story, and ongoing his work continues that not only on the actual page, but again, like physical bikes, three-dimensional work. The photo on the title page was Jim Yellowhawk as well. Yellowhawk takes ledger art in a unique direction by using mixed media into the format. And the material that he collages, sometimes on top of the colored pencils and ink, or sometimes printed digitally on a stretched canvas. In his own words, I'm always challenging myself, always trying to do something different that hasn't been done before. It seems like it's always moving, and I don't ever want to be stuck, saying of the industry, of the adaptations of mixed media. So I mixed in ledger paper with something different. I started gluing things together or collaging the original account and newspapers into the ledger paper, some of which are pretty old and muted, so the process of getting the materials to blend and to flow is a challenge. In this most recent work here, you can see on the screen, Yellowhawk used a COVID-19 vaccination card and integrated it into the work. Dust being kicked up by the horses is getting drawn on top of the card, so there's multiple layers of illustration all on a single canvas. That's his own personal COVID card, he said. I gave the warriors mast and colored pencil on top to blend the material all together. Yellowhawk has been doing ledger art as long as he has been writing. I started doing ledgers, in his own words, back in the 1980s when there were only a few artists doing it, and it all started to grow, and now everybody is doing it. For others not, however, so attuned to Western history, Native history and tradition sometimes can seem static, and the work of my next artist here, Melvin War Eagle, is a rebuttal to that, and he recounted his own frustrations as his art career took off in his early stages. I remember most of my life, many non-natives would continually ask me if my people still lived in teepees. When doing multiple searches of Native Americans, I was surprised that all of the images were either old portraits of ancestors in headdresses or powwow dancers. And when these are the only images you have to rely on, I fully understand why non-natives think that we have never moved on from the 1800s and that we all still live in teepees. And that's the adaptation of Melvin War Eagle's work from Pine Ridge Nation. His work is actually printed on textile fabric and is turned into tote bags, bandanas, or umbrellas, and he uses these patterns, these biker incorporated patterns with native designs. Like here, example, his pattern 4 Directions is printed and stretched onto multiple items that are sold, and his emphasis is that his art, his work, makes individual connections based on the individual people who buy his works specifically for them. And one example is his work with bikers. His own words, I have found that bikers respond very positively to my bandanas, such as this print. At first it was due to them being different. As time went on, many bikers began to appreciate the understanding behind the design itself. The biker culture to me represents the camaraderie and support for one another. It's knowing that we belong and are accepted just for being who we are. A mother explaining to her son was going through a bad time that my native outlaw bandana helped keep him in a positive frame of mind. The man who found a new understanding and respect of why the buffalo is so sacred to our native people through my buffalo spirit design. Even the simple joy of a woman who takes delight in a rainy day so she can proudly walk beneath my storm artwork umbrella. Each reaction has humbled me and given me great respect for how people are thirsting to learn and be connected to something. This, again, as you can see, is an additional example of both native and biker blended together through the skull artwork, through the colors, the 4 Directions, and the symmetry that is typical of what might be like a paisley bandana for a standard process. And again, the style, like Wargill's commented on multiple times, is that what makes his artwork special and what makes it an experience is that however it's used is up to the wearer, is up to the user of his printed art. And that connection, we're all connected, is something that he takes great pride in his work. And the connection of past with contemporary can also be profound, or it can be humorous, and that's one of ledger art's strengths, both as bikers and as a genre as a whole. And in the case of Dolores Purdy, who's Caddo and Winnebago, ledger art comes as a light mood, a humorous mood. When she was first came into her work as a ledger artist, she did so while researching her genealogy. And she was researching some of the Caddo prisoners who were held at Fort Marion and imprisoned outside of San Augustine. Many of her veteran relatives made ledgers and sold them, which is how she got into the medium as a whole. And her work has been, in her own words, I researched the historic ledgers and read every book I could find, as well as numerous road trips to see some of the old ones. And after extensive this resulted in pursuing this art medium. So in addition to her historical grounding in her family research, her work also has a very characteristic bright energy, which includes her layering watercolors on top of her work. As a teenager, quote, in the early 1970s, there was the psychedelic pop art movement, especially the work of Peter Max, was a huge influence on me. I also am drawn to the clean, straight lines of the Art Deco movement with elongated, somewhat disproportionate figures. By convention, most ledger artists don't interact with or draw attention to the script on the receipt paper on top of which they draw. But this is, again, different for Dolores. As for the paper, I do try to use paper that may have had another level or meaning or interest. For example, I like to use court documents when drawing scenes hunting bison, in reference to the breakout of some tribal communities. This could lead, sometimes the guys, again, quote, would be off the reservation assigned to them while they were hunting game. This could lead to big trouble, and the Record of Paroled Persons or the District Court of Osage County, Kansas, are great sheets for bison hunts. Otherwise, I try to put up something of interest, but not necessarily in connection to the story I'm drawing. Some of the interesting items written on paper is a fascinating read, and sometimes the titles kind of amplify that. For example, here is Cadillac Girls Just Want to Have Fun, spelt on purpose the way it is there. The pastel and the neon colors kind of lift up that tone and lift up the piece as a whole to reflect the influences of Art Deco as well. And again, Purdy's choice of scenes are distinct for her coloring. Based on martial prowess or ledger art was historically a male format, again, going back to the topics covered in Plains pictorial tradition. But Dolores Purdy says, as a woman, I feel it is important to bring the female perspective to this traditional art form and to show modern native Plains women are not so different as any other peoples. We have fun, we honor our ancestors, as well as do storytelling. I purposely veer far from the usual imagery typically seen in most of the contemporary ledger art. The smooth flow of Purdy's work invites viewers in. Generally, my philosophy is to have fun. I like fun images that tell a story and keep it light. I frequently have a faceless warrior or a woman look out at the view, not to put a face on my figures, because I want the viewer to read into their face/conversation what he or she would like to see or hear. My last artist that I want to celebrate today is Evans Flamand of the Rosebud Sioux Nation. And again, the style is a combination both of very traditional Plains pictorial art as well as the biker art of the Great Plains as a whole, of the contemporary era. And Flamand took up the artistic tradition when he was 7 years old. Quote, "The eagle gave me the gift. It happened when I was 7. The family was driving into the town of Valentine on Rosebud Reservation. I fell asleep and barely had my head on the window, and then the hot sun disappeared and I felt shade. I opened my eyes and it felt dark. It took a minute to see this golden eagle, but it was there for a minute and then just flew off into the deep blue sky." Unquote. The eagle's been an inspiration ever since. His eyes have to be just right to draw an eagle. He's got to be mean and happy at the same time. That's the kind of life he leads. I've been drawing them on all my life. I included on everything. And every piece, you can see both pieces here, have a small eagle silhouette in one of the corners. And this is significant of his work. Internationally recognized, Flammen's work combines the angular, geometric style of traditional ledger art with the color schemes and subject matter of present-day bikers. Warriors in full regalia and motorcycles and buffalo skulls that slowly turn open to reveal gears and engines, all are together. I put it all in, quote, "I put on everything. If it's native, it's all in. Horse tracks, buffalo tracks, it's all geometric work. It's all part of the Black Hills, and it's all continuing the tradition." Eagles, horses, choppers, all of this, his work very particularly and understandably appeals to bikers on the sales circuit. He says of particularly the Sturgis Art Rally, he says, "They love it," of the bikers at the fairs and rallies. "It's as simple as this. They're hardcore bikers, and they love it, the Plains heritage, and they want to hear more about the stories." Flammen's jolly nature engages people all over his circuit, but his work resonates specifically with these bikers who have the same experience of travel over the long plains. "They're like fellow natives," he says. "Not one that I met didn't respect the culture or want to learn more about it." Unquote. One day he plans to deck out a ride of his own as his own steel pony. Quote, "I don't have the time for it. It's good to be busy, but I've never had the time. Sometimes I'm going to make the whole thing decked out, so it's the whole thing like a deer or a buffalo robe, like a story on two wheels." So the artists that I've celebrated and hopefully introduced some new interest for you are from all over the Great Plains, but very, very appropriately, I think I want to bring the story back home to Oklahoma, both kind of where it all began and also where it's still going on, because in the 1920s, the sons and grandsons of some of the original Fort Marion captives went to school at the University of Oklahoma. And among them were 6 Kiowa students, soon to be known as the Kiowa Six, all of whom were promising art students who were taken in and tutored and mentored and promoted by Dr. Oscar Jacobson, who was the founding art professor at the University of Oklahoma. And under his tutelage and with his sponsorship, these Kiowa Six artists went first to Europe, then to the World Exposition in Paris, and then all throughout the world, promoting and pioneering, really, the new flat style of art, which in many ways were inspired directly by the first generation of ledger art, again, from that generation of Fort Marion survivors. And one particular artist of the Kiowa Six, I think is worth particularly noting, is that Stephen Mopope was the his great uncle, was none other than Silverhorn, one of the most prolific ledger artists in all of the Great Plains during the 19th century. And in the same year that David Okerhader became a saint, the Jacobson House Foundation turned the house of Oscar Jacobson, where those Kiowa Six students learned and promoted their work, turned that house into an art gallery for current day artists and a museum for the work of Oscar Jacobson and his Kiowa Six students. And to this day, the Jacobson House remains a gathering place for community and a continuity of art. So, in conclusion, I'd like to reiterate that one magic word that I've used to understand art and time and place, and Oklahoma in a broad sense, which is, again, borderlands, artistically, culturally, geographically, for a lot of reasons. But whether it's the South or the Southwest or the Great Plains, Oklahoma, even before it was Oklahoma under Indian territory, it's a cultural, geographical borderlands. Different languages come here, different art styles come here, different materials come here, and new material happens, new mediums happens, new cultures happen. And that is something that is an ongoing process. Oklahoma doesn't stop being a Borderlands just because the Kiowa Six have retired and there's new artists. There's new Borderlands being made with new materials, new mediums, and new artists from all over the state and all over the region. And the window that hopefully I've told this story through is biker art. And biker art is accepted both as a fluid and adaptive medium, but also very much a continuity of the mutually understood symbols and meanings and power behind the Great Plains pictorial tradition. And as these artists remain fluid and adaptive and continue the culture and heritage of their communities, so too hopefully will other Americans as they navigate their own borderlands in years to come. Thank you very much.
Talk loud. Give you a mic anyway. Don't choose that.
Well, it's not too in-depth, but the image before Oaken making medicine, where did you find those ledger art pieces? There was one there I don't think I've ever seen before. Two, actually, but the one on the bottom right, or wait, left.
The one with the walls?
Nope, the opposite.
I have the citations in a different document. I can pull it up.
Email me.
I will.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? I'll ask you one.
Yeah, please.
So these are living artists, right, that you did these interviews with?
Dolores Purdy, Melvin War Eagle, Evans Flamand, and Jim Yellowhawk. Yes, ma'am.
How did you collect their information? Was it through oral histories, and how did you document that? Is it something that people can go back and read? Has it been transcribed?
Well, actually, I'm very glad you brought that up because the original research that I conducted was mostly through interviews over the phone. And this research was done and published into an article in First American's Art Magazine, another Oklahoma standard treasure. It's published out of Norman. And that's a promotion for contemporary art in the Native world and Native art history. It was published in a winter issue in 22, I believe. And again, like much of all of their art, all of the art of the contemporary artists, that was photographed and scanned for that issue particularly, or they provided the scans for that. So a thank you both to those artists for their time, and also a thank you to First American's Art Magazine for their reissue permission. Yes.
What got you into this kind of art? Oh, hello there. What got you into this kind of artwork, and why do you continue doing it? I mean, reading about it and producing about it.
Well, I think it's a very yeah, there you go. It's cool. There you have it. I think it's also just fascinating that it is both very, very new, and it's a very, very long running trend. Some of the oldest art in North America is from that Plains pictorial tradition, and some of it also adapts. And if you're able to look at winter counts in person, I believe the Fred Jones down in Norman has one on the wall. It's the full width of a bison robe. It's as big as that 6x8 flag. It's massive. And then some of the receipt papers, like some of these styles, are the size of a postcard. Which I have to double check, but I believe this one to follow up on your original question about this picture of the warriors at school. I believe that's the title. I believe that was included in one of the Okerhater letters. Because he was such a prolific writer, he was so active as a deacon. A lot of his work survived because he sent it as part of a letter, part of a present. So I guess to answer, and that was part of the answer. I think it's just a fascinating way that it's ledger art itself has survived, first on newspaper rocks, winter counts. They've become massive, huge pieces measured in feet, and then postcards measured in, centimeters. And even, now they're working, the ledger art format works in memes. If you look up the work of Adam Youngbear, his work has, he puts ledger art through the process of like Ninja Turtles and SpongeBob. Patrick Star having the 7th Cavalry hat looking silly. It's a universal symbol, but at the same time, we know where it's coming from, and that's I think that's the delight of ledger art, is because it's both so ancient but also very much modern.
How many years you wish to get sold in class or by friends or?
I couldn't tell you. I think again, like it almost seems like a going through some of these images. These appear in documentaries. These appear in cowboy movies. This sort of work is so universally recognized as part of the West. Even I think Melvin's work kind of is exemplary of this. Like it can almost, to put it flippantly, sneak into kind of cultural mainstream because it's so adaptable, because it works with whatever is the contemporary work. And I think it may have just sort of like worked through Western cowboy movies and documentaries and work like that.
Bonnie?
Oh, sorry, you're hiding in the back.
I guess I was absent that day. When did the Kiowa 5 become the Kiowa 6?
So all six of the artists had overlapping careers. Some lasted much longer than others. Probably the most famous, the most prolific, just by number of works produced and number of years active as an artist, was Stephen Mopope. And the shortest by number of years active as an artist was Lois Smokey, who by the time the book was published, that was that book right here. I believe it's published in 27. The original published is 27, and the students first come to school a few years before that. And Oscar Jacobson hosts them all six of them, and by the time that the book has been published, Lois Smokey has already retired from being an artist, certainly. So to a certain extent, the Kiowa 5 become the Kiowa 6 after more of Lois Smokey's work gets discovered. There's a reprint in, I believe, 1979, 79 or 77, which wakes up the interest in Lois Smokey's work because, again, Lois's Smokey work appears in the original, and her work in that becomes one of the most beloved pieces in the reprint. And so today, even though she's sort of disappeared from most of the work, her pieces are some of the most valued because not only their quality but because their rarity. Were you gonna? Okay, sorry.
I could ask you questions about this stuff all day long.
But my next question would be, how does this ledger work compare to some of their earlier works that we see in the post offices around Oklahoma? So we know that some of, like Stephen Mopope, worked with the WPA to put the section art in these post offices. Are you seeing any correlation between these two types of styles?
So this is a good question. The answer is yes and. The ledger art, in the traditional sense, if you're thinking piece of paper with colored pencil or crayon, that's a generation or two before the Kiowa 6 become famous in the 20s, right? Some of the oldest ledger art that's still surviving is from the Civil War or the era of the Civil War. That didn't mean much to the Caddo or the Wichita at the time, but that era. So we're thinking about like maybe two generations complete before the Kiowa 6 become their own work. And so this is the 1920s. The same era as Art Deco, the same era as those very flat kind of New Yorker artwork. The same way as either the tarot cards that are very thin and flowing in watercolor, but also in native country, there's the style of the Kiowa Six, flat style. In New Mexico, Santa Fe and Ildefonso, there's a very similar style being discovered. And then only a few years later, over at Bacon, Oklahoma again becomes a borderlands between additional tribes who are creating out of Bacon University, Bacon College. So, and this is just one example. Again, I am not an expert in flat style at all, but you can see there is some parallel in the way that there's very few subjects in a lot of the flat style of Kiowa Six work. They're very much of an emphasis on the figure themselves, their regalia, and the language is in the ceremony, the posture. Not so much a big landscape, not so much a big incorporated scene. And that changes little by little, obviously, because art changes little by little, and the artists change little by little over time with their new experiences. So I'd say, like, especially the early, like, first book of the Kiowa Six, you could look at Silverhorn, and others of the Southern Plains Ledger, and you could look at this book, and you would see very many of the same regalia, very many of the same even families being portrayed, if you know what to look for. But this is the beginning of a very different genre, and I think the Kiowa Six, especially those first couple of years, is a transition period.
Yeah, I just have a short question for you. You were talking about the prisoners at Fort Marion, mentioned Cheyenne, Plains tribes. There's also Seminoles that were held captive there as well.
Yes, absolutely. I certainly wanted to. It wasn't my intention to omit a much bigger history, but you're absolutely right. Fort Marion is originally was called Castillo de San Marcos, and it was, I think, maybe the oldest standing building in the United States. The Spanish built it at the turn of the century, and there's a very long history of war between the Spanish and Florida natives, including the Seminole, in this era, or in the Spanish era, and then the British era and the American era after that, when Monroe buys Florida from Spain. So in a very real way, the Red River War is not at all the start of the controversy not at all the start of the war, especially as Fort Marion is concerned. That's absolutely important to keep in mind for areas as old as this area of colonization. So thank you for pointing that out. And there's a lot of history around that. There's a lot of sorrow.
Any other questions? Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Bland.
Thank you very much.